Good morning. My name's Dorothy Young. I'm in the Water Supply Division at TCEQ and a proud member of an organization we're here to talk about a little bit today called TWIC. And TWIC stands for the Texas Water Infrastructure Coordination Committee. And we started a number of years ago as a group of colleagues, co-workers, friends, to try to tackle some particular problems. So what we did was we started meeting because, I meant the regulatory agencies like TCEQ, EPA, and then funding agencies like USDA, TDA, Water Development Board, and assistance providers like Rural Water Association, Communities Unlimited, because we had a certain problem we were trying to help tackle around Waco. There were a bunch of water systems that not only was their aquifer being depleted, but they had naturally occurring contaminants. And so they were looking for other sources. And they had gotten together on their own, and we started meeting with them. And one of the questions always is, how can we come into compliance? What's the best way, and how do we pay for it? Well, those meetings were fairly successful, and we realized we should still keep working together. So we formed TWIC. It's a volunteer organization. We call it an umbrella organization of these different agencies. Some states it's required by the governor or the legislature, but in Texas it's totally voluntary. And we meet every other month. We take turns holding the meetings and discuss projects and who's got money, or was there a hurricane and who has money for that, and sort of a brainstorming. And we also invite guests. But today you're lucky, I hope. You have this talk. This is part one. After lunch at 1 o'clock, you'll get to meet the TWIC members in person and be able to tell them what kind of funding you're looking for, what kind of projects you're struggling with, and maybe share your stories. If we have time today, I'm going to turn some of the questions after I turn them on the panelists, maybe on you all, to get some of your feedback. So one of the things I wish we could do easier is have more water system to water system mentoring. It's so helpful to talk to your neighbors, talk to other people, and learn how did they learn how to raise rates? How did they find a good engineer? So hopefully we can get some of those conversations going this session or at 1 o'clock. So our group today, we're a mini TWIC. We're the very tiny little TWIC. I'm regulatory. Suzanne is with Texas Department of Agriculture. She's funding. And Steve's with the Texas section of the AWWA, an assistance provider. To give you a little background on Suzanne, she is the state director of the Community Development Block Grant Program. Many of you in small communities are probably familiar with that. It's a federally funded program that provides, among other kinds of projects, water and wastewater infrastructure for rural Texas and serves 244 counties and 800 small cities at about $70 million in grants a year. Pretty impressive. So it's nice to have her background with us. And Steve, who actually was one of my original managers here at the TCEQ many years ago, has had 47 years of experience in the water arena here in Texas. He retired from TCEQ in 2003 and has his own consulting company helping folks with compliance and choosing appropriate technologies. But today he's wearing a hat of being the chairman of the Texas section of AWWA Small Systems Committee. And that rather recently formed group has been instrumental in helping a lot of small systems around Texas scope projects, find engineers, get on their feet, and deal with some strong issues, hard issues. So the first question I'm going to ask both of you is, from your experience working with different kinds of water systems that are looking for funding, what three things do you think successful applicants have or do to be successful? We often talk about those who aren't working, but how do the good ones make it work? Suzanne?
So I'm speaking mainly from my experience with the Community Development Block Grant Program, but also, with our colleagues. One of the things that's really important to being successful is knowing what you need. So that could be a planning study, that could be an asset management list, that could be a capital improvements plan, that could be just you knowing your system well enough to be able to identify and prioritize what your needs are beyond everything. Because we know you need everything, right? We fully understand that, but being able to identify not just the most critical crisis item, but what else do you specifically need, and being able to capture that in a short narrative. This is what I need to, this is the problem I'm trying to solve, and this is how I think I want to solve it. Doesn't mean you need engineering plans yet, but knowing exactly what kind of a thing you are trying to accomplish is really important. Otherwise, you're starting from behind, and you're trying to develop a project kind of on the fly, and then it changes as you go along, and it becomes very, very complicated for everybody to work with. Another thing that is really important is being able to dedicate time throughout the process. So making sure that you have staff or have hired in consultants or whatever it takes so that someone is on it throughout the life of the grant, throughout the life of the application process is really important, because when things fall through the cracks, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to resurrect them. Someone who has that attention to detail to look at things, it is heartbreaking when we have to disqualify applications because they didn't fill something out correctly, or they missed a page, or whatever the case may be. But we have to be fair to everyone, so we have to follow that. So having someone who can actually dedicate that time to seeing the process all the way through is really important. So.
Hi there. So I have been providing some level of technical assistance to small communities probably closer to 50 years at this point. And so, which is amazing since I only look like, I'm at 49, so that's amazing. So I've learned a few things about how that goes over the years, and what I've learned in this last 5-6 years, I guess now, that we've been doing this pro bono assistance to communities with bringing in some technical help to figure things out, is that it's not overly complicated, the number one thing. The number one thing I've learned is that communities, the ones we are focusing on the most are communities that serve usually under 500 population. In Texas, we have a numbers game problem where we've got around 50% of the community systems, around 2,000 of them are under 500 population. So that's a lot of, let's say, potential pool of problems because they don't have the critical mass. There's a lot of problems that are in those communities, and they are actually very much linked to affordable housing. So they're essential in our economy of Texas to have them up and running and keeping going. So the number one thing I've learned is that is for the community, either a leadership team or a person or someone representing that entity, to have the gumption to ask for help, because most of them are afraid to look foolish or reveal that they've got these inadequacies and problems. And so that unwillingness leads them to go further and further into the abyss of underwater, so to speak, where they cannot get back out. And so a little community, I won't mention names today, but one up in Northeast Texas, and it was way down the tubes and completely collapsed. Collection system, wastewater on the ground. But one person finally came to leadership there, and she asked for help. She knew nothing. She just was willing to keep probing, and that probing process led her into our network. And we have brought all kinds of assistance to that community and some triage and everything. I won't go into and the other second thing was what Suzanne mentioned, is having an awareness of the scope that you need, because it won't be the beginning scope, the finished scope, but it'll be a good starting point to have an awareness of all of your needs, because if you're going to go after the money or any kind of money, which we can get into later, it's good to try to fix it all in one shot if you can, so. Thanks.
One of the things when we're approached, whether it's a regulatory agency or any of the TWIC members, people say, I need a grant. And that's it. They think that's the magic bullet. And so part of the reason we're doing this particular presentation is talk about the stuff you need before the money, or the stuff you can do yourself to support looking for funding. And one of the things is sometimes people don't understand the next steps when they're choosing a project or scoping a project, like what is the real cost? So if Suzanne and Steve, we all know that most of the traditional funding agencies, almost like 100%, only fund infrastructure. So if you were going to choose like an arsenic treatment or what kind of surface water treatment plant to build, what other costs should they be thinking about to factor in the real cost of the project? So, and what some of the surprises that systems can face? And I know, Steve, you're very familiar with this, with small systems that might want to get this kind of membrane plant or this kind of arsenic treatment. But what have they not thought about, and what kind of surprises have you seen?
Well, so one of the things that hopefully people, when you're doing your scoping, one of the things to truly consider is the long-term operational capability of that. And we live, that I'm still functioning in the water community is one of the reasons for it. This is like the golden era of water, is that we have so much technology and answers to problems that like 20 years ago that we did not have that solution, and now we do. The problem is that a viable solution and sustainable solution for a small community? That's a different question. So much like our smartphones, which have like the power of a giant UNIVAC computer of 50 years ago, there's technologies making these things simpler and easier. So what I would say is, when you're interfacing to get whether it's even operating a distribution system, you've got pressure issues and chlorine, there are sensors and other things to actually make it easier for you. And so we've kind of stepped through this wormhole from where it was like it's complicated stuff and big and little systems can't do it, to like, no, it's actually becoming very user friendly. So in your infrastructure purchase that you're making with USDA or through the Community Development Block Grant process or whatever it is, try to build in possibly this some operational ease with your capital. Like they put in the right kind of systems, and that it's got some record of success. It's not like you're the first one ever, to do that. And so you can have remote monitoring on your phone from even a small system for your pressure and chlorine residuals and other things, to have an awareness of what's going on. And just, I would say, work very closely with your technical assistance provider folks to help you find something that is, workable and has a track record kind of thing, not just,
Right.
You're not in any position to be the guinea pig on this thing.
To jump in from the regulatory standpoint, though, you need to have your operators trained so that when the power goes out and the phone doesn't work, they can still run the plant. After the hurricane, we've had a lot of people who said our plants are down, we can't do a damn thing. Well, that's because they were used to having everything automated. And also from a regulatory point of view, sometimes we see people buying Cadillacs when they don't need Cadillacs, and putting in fancy plants that they don't have the operators trained up to run them, and then they never considered when the membranes fail, they have to go buy more membranes. That is not covered by the traditional funding agencies. The training of the operators isn't covered by your grant. All those kind of things. I mean, we're beginning to get some grants for training, but in the general traditional funding, a lot of folks sometimes will buy fancy, and I used to do enforcement. I was an enforcement coordinator at TCQ for a number of years, and I went out to brand new water and wastewater plants that were under enforcement. Because they're like, well, the grant didn't pay for for the filters, so we just stopped using them. Well, that's the kind of cost, too, you have to consider when you're choosing what kind of project you're going to do. How sustainable is it? Do you have the staff to run it? And sometimes those vendors can be very persuasive. So that's from my regulatory point of view. From a funding point of view, what do you think about this?
O&M is definitely a big thing because we don't know. We are not experts in operation and maintenance cost. We don't fund operation and maintenance cost. That is something we're relying on you as the system to know what you're getting into. We do encourage, so when we write a grant at TDA, we're writing the solution to the problem, but not necessarily the exact engineering scope, right? Like we're trying to say things like rehab this item, but not tell you exactly what you need, what level of technology you're going to include. Make sure you have that discussion in full. Because one of the things we do when you apply the next time is we look back at what your previous grant was and see, is there overlap here? Because if there's overlap because you stopped using the filters and now the next thing has been damaged, we're going to have a lot of questions on whether or not this is a feasible project. So we do check on some of that, and occasionally it does show up. But yeah, we need you all to know the operation and maintenance cost. Think about training not just for the current operator, but for the operator in 5 years if someone turns over. Your current operator is not going to be around forever, so you don't have to design your system solely for that individual, but you need to be able to train the next person. Make sure that you've got that kind of cost and thought process built in.
So that's a good point. I would add that when you're doing your capital infrastructure, there's ways, it's different lenders are different, have different guidance and rules, but you can build in that, like the equipment was required, your specs, you say, you have to have training modules of what it looks like when you give us all the manuals, it has to be electronic, it has to have some videos of how to calibrate or et cetera. You can build all that in there, and you can even, so it's got a ready access to the next generation walking in and go, you watch this YouTube video, this will tell you how to calibrate the turbidimeter. The manager's left and you're it, and just watch this and twice and you're going to know how to calibrate the turbidimeter. So you have to have some record of that and knowledge of that, but you can build that in on the front end when you're purchasing your new stuff, is I want to have all of the electronic manuals and videos relating to how to maintain this stuff available to us on purchase.
One of the things we've been doing at TWIC when folks have come in, and generally, again, they think the funding bullet, that's what we need. And a number of years ago after Winter Storm Uri, we had a woman who was running a small water system that purchased water from a neighboring water district. And she didn't like the way the district treated her during the storm. So she wanted to put in her own water system, and she wanted a grant to do it. And we just gently started going around and asking her questions like, do you have an operator? Have you found out if there's any groundwater available? Did you talk to the Groundwater Conservation District? So what's the water quality in the area? How many customers are you going to have? And all of a sudden she went, oh, maybe what I need to do is learn how to work better with the district. So that's an example of, you sort of people will get wedded to and I'm sure you all experience this, especially those of you water systems that have boards of directors or a city council, people get married to an idea. So I'm going to, as a case study for Suzanne and Steve, lots of times people say they do need funding, but then you start talking to them and say, let's say 2 board members want to use an old irrigation well for their new source of water. They're scared about the drought, they don't like water restrictions, they want to get another source, and they know about this irrigation well on a ranch nearby. And they're pretty sure they can talk the rancher into letting them use it, and that's the best thing, it's already there. 2 other board members say, hey, look, they just built a new line across the street from a good water system. We can just interconnect, and we can just purchase treated water. How about let's do that? So now you've got these 2 factions. You've got 2 board members who want to use the old irrigation well on the ranch. You've got 2 who want to purchase water from the neighbors. What kind of things would you, if you were advising that board, for them to consider in making a decision? And Steve from a technical side and Suzanne from a financial side.
On a technical side, I would say that most folks have not done a objective options analysis that looks at the pros and cons of any choice. Every choice has its risks and benefits, and if you haven't really worked that list with 2 or 3 parties that have this combined wisdom versus the narrow wisdom that any one of us would have. So you just try to get more than one person in the room and go through these option analysis that look at these what's the problem with this idea? What could go wrong? You try to go ahead and do the kind of the red team, blue team analysis. We're like, okay, this is going to not work. Then what? And so I've seen, for example, some irrigation well deals work out for people as a source or backup source, and I've seen them blow up miserably too, where they put some money in a pipeline to get to it, and they didn't do their homework, and the casing rotted out, and and the very expensive vertical turbine pump doesn't work anymore. Now what?
So what are some of the unknowns of choosing an irrigation well on a ranch?
Well, the good news is you can do, a lot of downhole work nowadays between cameras and other pump testing types of things. You can figure out water quality and other things about that, but you also need to worry about looking at hopefully how it was cemented, et cetera, whether it's susceptible to contamination, and you can do some quality work on it. But that doesn't mean it's still got some aged equipment perhaps attached to it, or you've got a hole that you're going to get, you have to put your pump in it. So having somebody else to produce water for you as a backup supply is a really good option, because they're on a different electrical, they've got probably newer equipment, et cetera, so the chance of that going down is much less than probably your own good or not good operations taking care of this other well that you go in. So adding additional intakes of water is a very good thing to add sustainability and reliability to your system.
So in this scenario, you're really trading certainty for control. And so you're going to have to decide which of those is most important to you as a system. As a funding agency, we're always going to lean towards certainty. Is this going to be a reliable source of water in the long term, in the simplest way as possible? For us personally at CDBG, we always are hesitant about wells. New wells, rehab wells, they are risky because there's so much you don't know. Are you going to get good water? What kind of treatment are you going to need on the water that you can pull out? How far down are you going to have to go to find that water? It's working now. Is it going to continue to work? What happens in a drought? Is that going to still continue to work? For the CDBG program, if you don't get good water, it doesn't matter how much money you spent on that well, none of it is eligible. You have to keep going until you get water, or none of the funding is eligible. And that is a huge risk to take, both for the agency and for the system. And so you need to be really certain that you're going to get good water if you're going to be talking about wells. And when you have another option, we're going to be asking questions like, okay, why isn't this a good option? And maybe there are good reasons. Maybe the other system doesn't play well with others, and that's something you have to take into account. Are you going to be able to work with this system in the long term? We can try and help facilitate that at TWIC, trying to have those conversations figure out who the right people are, because if we can have reliable water for as many people as possible, that's the win. What's the best way to do that?
So again, from the regulatory side, you say irrigation well, and TCEQ goes, what? Were plans ever submitted? No, it was never meant for human consumption. It was going to be for cows. Speaking of cows, how many are there and how close are they? Do you have easements? Does the rancher really own the property? Is there a lien on it? All these kinds of questions come up. And there's this mindset is if we get the water out of the ground and we sell it, we're getting free water and we're making money. Why would we go and buy water? Oh boy, do the math. Many years ago, we were working with a system that had a failing surface water treatment plant, but aligned to a nearby city. But again, well, the lake's free. Yeah, but you don't have an operator, and you're paying penalties to TCEQ. Yeah, but that water's free. No, it's not free. It is not free. And so sometimes it's cheaper to buy water than to sell water. And that's a concept that if you can help us get through to a lot of people about that, that would be great. And speaking of that, hiring consultants is sometimes one of the things that a lot of folks get confused about. And when people come to TWIC, they'll say, well, we need a grant and we need this. And then the next question is, unless it's a very specific small project, you're going to need TCEQ approval. And for TCEQ approval, you're probably going to need a PE, professional engineer. So what do you guys advise on, like, finding auditors, engineers, financial consultants. What's a couple helpful hints in looking for them, procuring them, and supervising them?
So consultants are great. Consultants can be a great tool in your tool chest. What they're not is a replacement for you. So I don't want you to think that you're offloading all the work when you hire a consultant. They are filling in the gaps where you either don't have the expertise or don't have the time to devote to that particular task. But it's not taking you out of the equation. You have to stay in the equation when you have consultants. One thing to remember is to make sure you get consultants, if you're going to hire them, and if you're going to use federal funding, you need to get them on board as early as possible in the process, because if you start having very detailed conversations with an engineer and they're starting to sketch things and they're starting to work with you on what a scope might look like, they've now developed a conflict of interest and you can't hire them in the future for some funding sources. It depends on the rules of the funding source. But a lot of times, if you go too far in talking with them about developing a project, they can no longer be your hired engineer. So you need to get them on the books as a consultant as early as possible. And I know that feels weird and wrong to be hiring someone when you don't have a project yet, but if you know you're going after federal funds, you know you're going after federal funds, and you might change what the scope looks like, but you know you need a professional engineer, get them on board. The same goes for administrative consultants, and not every agency uses administrative consultants, but some of us do. They're there to keep you out of trouble. And again, they can't be involved in talking about the project in depth and in detail in a way that's not, the same thing you would tell your general public without being a hired consultant, or they can't be hired in the future because they've been part of developing, so they can't be part of the competition later, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is get them in early. And know what you have, what expertise you have, and what expertise, you have a full-time job already. So just because you can do the work, do you have the time to do that work, or do you need to hire someone who can do that work? Competitive procurement, it's a big deal. For us at CDBG, it's the Texas Local Government Code that's going to control all of our procurement. It's more restrictive than the federal standards for the most part, so that is going to control, even if you're a district, if you're hiring consultants for a project, and you're going through the county as the applicant on your behalf, Texas Local Government Code is what is going to control. And just because you say, but I'm hiring them, doesn't mean the rules don't apply. So just be real careful that if you're going after federal funds and you're hiring consultants, you know what the rules are.
And before Steve jumps in, I've sometimes, especially with really small communities, where maybe you have a lot of retirees who came from big companies and they know how to run businesses, they know how to scope projects. I've seen some communities form like water committees and have volunteers help with projects, not necessarily being the engineer, or, but sometimes you have expertise right around you that you might not have considered or even know about. And sometimes those people can make a world of difference. There's a couple I'm working with right now, a couple customers, now board members, who came from industry that already know about all kinds of things, budgets. So sometimes that's a good option. Steve, your thoughts on consultants in general, specifically?
So back to what I said earlier at the start of this conversation about numbers game. There's these 2,000 community systems that serve under 500 population. Very few of them have a working long-term relationship with an engineer, that they already have like a ongoing asset management evaluation process and an awareness of what their plan looks like to go after funding. And if they don't, if the very few that do, it's dated usually. The bulk of all of these small communities that I've interfaced with, they need help. So let's imagine this is the room of funding, and that door right there, and let's say there's another door right there. That door that you must enter, one of the doors, is you have to have a professional engineer do a piece of the application. It's a preliminary engineering feasibility report, and it's a sealed, PE sealed budget that relates to that. And it can be high in general, and it can be conservative and in general nature, but that you want your funding application in many agencies like the Water Development Board and probably USDA also, it's not going to get reviewed. It can't even get in. It won't get in that door. without that document. And the other door that's not here right now, there is a door right there. The other door that you get in this room is that you have to have usually a 3-year look-back type of audit set of documents. And so without those two things, you might have a great project that desperately needs to be done. So one of the reasons we came into existence at this volunteer pro bono program is we have quite a few PEs and other water professionals, and we are, in many cases, we're helping get these documents done in concert with Communities Unlimited, Texas Rural Water Association, and Water Finance Exchange, our partner technical assistance groups. We are partnering with those folks, and we will help get those documents ready. And the one that's been most gapped has been, and if you're going after just grant only, you don't have to have this, but most of them will require the audit process. And we're working with Suzanne right now to do a pilot program to develop where we'll be able to fund doing these look-back audits for small communities if we can get some more money rolled into the process. And her agency is funding this pilot process that we're going to go. I think we're going to do that. And so we're trying to, and so there's this gap between what we wish we had and what we do have. And this is the way it is in America mostly, the same gap. It's like we need some engineers to help us get this thing we're even applied for. So in our experience over the last 5 years, we've written these things up and then put it in with Communities Unlimited and others, and Water Finance Exchange, got those documents submitted for like the drinking water SRF, and then they got into money, and now we help that community go through an RFQ process to properly select an engineer. So rather than us taking work from engineers, we are liberating projects that in a million years would never have availability to an engineer to compete for. Those are now coming out there, and we're helping them, and we're doing it like as we speak. There's some of those RFQ processes going on to get engineers selected, and then we can help guide that process a little bit as third-party people. But this group of volunteers cannot do 2,000 systems, so we're trying to talk to people like L'Oreal, who is our old former employee friend of ours from the Water Commission to the TCQ. She's now the chair of the Water Development Board. We're going to be talking to her perhaps in the very near future about what can we do with the new money type stuff that's coming out of the legislature to aggregate some money to fund some list of PEs and CPA processes to help that process along in a much more volume basis. That's because without that volume capability, it's going to be, you're going to get your project, but they're not going to get their project because the system that came to TWIC about 2 meetings back, they had 3. They qualified high on drinking water SRF 3 times, but they didn't have the audit, so they had to. They couldn't accept any money.
Right. So
one other quick thing, if I
Okay.
can add. We do have for CDBG a list of interested engineers on our website. If you're an engineer and you would like to be on that website, there's just a little link for you to fill out and give us your information. We're trying to build up some of that list because sometimes it's hard to find an engineer that's willing to work on small projects. So texasagriculture.gov/CDBG. That is one place you can look for if you're trying to find those resources.
there are also free resources, and I've seen some folks pay a lot of money for things that could be free if they knew about some of the groups that provide free on-site assistance. TCQ has a contract with the Texas Rural Water Association. Whenever I'm talking to somebody who's looking for funding, I always have at least 2 first questions. What are your rates? And what's your water loss issue? Do you have one? Number one, so I was talking to someone yesterday that last time they raised the rates, their water system was 2018. But they need money. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do need money. And you need to raise your rates. And you need to raise your rates every year, every couple of years. You need to treat it like a business, run it like a business. Everything else goes up. Why not the cost of water? How do you educate your board? How do you educate your customers? How do you communicate that this is what it costs to treat water, keep our storage tanks from leaking? I talked to a system last year, their storage tank collapsed in the middle of the night. They had a grant to fix it from a previous year, but it had a 25% match. So they turned down the grant money. And we don't want to raise our rates. And then I get really cranky. So that's one thing. There are folks who can help you do rate studies for free. Sometimes it's easier to bring someone else in to come talk to you about rates. But educating people, it's just really hard. When you run a water system, you're not Spectrum or T-Mobile and making those decisions in some far-off place. You go to church with those folks, you see them in the grocery store, and if they don't like their rates, you're going to hear about it. But they're not calling their cell provider. They're just paying it. So it's that education kind of like, oh my gosh, and what is it like when the water's out? Or our 15th boil water notice. You can tell I get a little passionate about this. We've got about 5 minutes. I'm sorry that's all for questions right now, but like I said, you can join us. Does anyone have any questions on this, or a story to tell, or something to share?
Could you speak a little more to the conflict of interest in getting a consultant on board in the development stage versus just I assume you're talking about hiring a firm for that same process that then later on in actually procuring funds would not be eligible?
Right. So, and this is specific to CDBG. That it's going to vary a little bit by funding source. So I can only speak with expertise for CDBG. But you cannot compete for let's say engineering. You can't compete to do an engineering design work on a project you help develop. So if you are involving an engineer to the point that they are developing the project, they've taken themselves out of the running for any subsequent competition for design work or construction work. What we've encouraged our folks to do is, as soon as you know, as a system, I have these 5 needs. I need a new water tank, I need a new generator, I need to replace lines. I know I have lots of needs, and there is a grant opportunity coming up. I don't know which one I'm going to pick yet. I need to have detailed conversations with the engineer, but I know I want to apply for funding because I have plenty of needs to account for that. I'm going to get that RFQ out for the water system, for various improvements to the water system, not for the tank. I'm going to make that RFQ more broad so that I can have those conversations after the engineer is on board.
I think, Jason, I think that the other funding sources are not necessarily that narrow about it. I think they just do a separate RFQ, and they do scoring and they select them because that's what's been happening on like drinking water SRF. Sometimes that little engineer is the only one that'll even apply for this area. So we have a problem just getting 2 or more people to even try to compete for these projects. They're small projects, and so.
Yeah, it's always wise to check with each funding agency you're considering. They all have different rules and regulations and availability. TWIC.org is our website, and they have contact information for all the funding agencies and the assistance providers. We're taking up someone else's time, so we got to skedaddle. Hope to see you after lunch. Thank you.